My name is Julia, and at 34, I thought I had the perfect life. Sitting in that elegant French restaurant surrounded by 25 of my closest friends and family, I never imagined my birthday dinner would become the night everything unraveled. Marcus sat to my right, my husband of 5 years, while my younger sister Sophia occupied the seat to my left. Something felt different about tonight, the way Sophia kept stealing glances at Marcus, the nervous energy radiating from both of them. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Please subscribe if you want to hear how one dinner changed everything. The story of Marcus and me began 8 years ago at a technology conference in downtown Boston. I was presenting our company's new marketing software when this handsome man in a perfectly tailored suit approached me afterward with intelligent questions about our user acquisition strategy. He introduced himself as Marcus, a corporate lawyer specializing in tech startups. We talked for 3 hours that day, missing half the conference sessions, because we were so engrossed in conversation. He had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room, his deep brown eyes focused entirely on whatever I was saying. 2 weeks later, he called to ask if I'd like to continue our discussion over dinner, and I said yes without hesitation. Our courtship felt like something from a romance novel. Marcus would send flowers to my office every Friday with notes that referenced inside jokes from our dates. He'd remember tiny details I'd mentioned weeks before, like how I preferred oat milk in my coffee, or that I collected vintage postcards from estate sales. After 2 years of dating, he proposed at the same French restaurant where we were now celebrating my birthday, getting down on one knee right as the sun set over the Charles River. The entire restaurant had applauded, and I'd said yes through happy tears, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. We built what everyone considered the perfect life together. Our 4-bedroom brownstone in Beacon Hill became the gathering place for dinner parties and holiday celebrations. Every morning, Marcus would wake up 30 minutes before me to prepare my coffee exactly how I liked it, leaving sticky notes with silly drawings on the bathroom mirror. He supported my career ambitions, celebrating each promotion like it was his own achievement. When I became marketing director at 29, he threw a surprise party and gave a toast that made everyone cry. Our friends called us relationship goals, and honestly, I believed them. My relationship with Sophia, however, had always been more complicated. 5 years younger than me, she'd been the miracle baby my parents had given up hoping for. From the moment she arrived with her perfect blonde curls and sapphire blue eyes, she became the sun our family orbited around. While I got good grades and worked hard for everything, Sophia seemed to float through life on her beauty and charm. Teachers gave her extensions without asking, boys carried her books, and our parents never could say no to her pouty lips and batting eyelashes. Growing up, I played the responsible older sister without complaint. When Sophia wrecked her car at 17 because she was texting while driving, I gave her my savings for a new one so our parents wouldn't find out. When she dropped out of college 3 times, I was the one who convinced our parents to keep paying for her fresh starts. She'd call me at 2 in the morning drunk and stranded somewhere, and I'd always come get her, no questions asked. That was just our dynamic, me cleaning up her messes while she continued making new ones. The pattern continued into adulthood. Sophia became a freelance model and influencer, which meant irregular income and constant financial crisis. She'd show up at our house with designer bags, but unable to make rent, and Marcus would write her a check while I bit my tongue. She borrowed $3,000 for a photography course she never finished, another $5,000 for a business venture that disappeared like smoke. I never asked for repayment because keeping peace in the family seemed more important than money. 6 months before my birthday, I started noticing changes in our routine. Sophia began dropping by the house more frequently, always when Marcus was working from home. She'd arrive in yoga pants that looked painted on crop tops that left nothing to imagination, claiming she was in the neighborhood. Marcus assured me I was being paranoid when I mentioned it felt inappropriate. She was family, he said, and I was reading too much into innocent visits. Then came the text messages. Sophia started reaching out to Marcus directly about legal questions for her modeling contracts. He'd explained she needed professional guidance, and who better than her brother-in-law to help, but the texts came at odd hours. 10 at night, 6 in the morning, weekend afternoons. When I'd glance at his phone, He'd quickly switch screens, saying it was confidential client information. The lawyer excuse became his shield against my growing suspicions. I remembered one particular incident 3 months ago that should have been my wake-up call. I'd come home early from a canceled meeting to find Sophia's car in our driveway. Walking into the house, I heard laughter from upstairs. I found them in our bedroom, Sophia sitting on our bed while Marcus showed her something on his laptop. They jumped apart when I entered, both looking flushed and guilty. Marcus claimed they were reviewing contract terms that required privacy, but Sophia could barely meet my eyes. I wanted to scream to demand real answers, but instead I offered to make coffee and pretended everything was normal. Planning my 34th birthday celebration became my escape from the growing tension. I threw myself into every detail, spending 2 months coordinating the perfect evening. L'Etoile held special meaning as the place where Marcus had proposed, where we'd celebrated our biggest moments. I worked with the chef to create a custom 7-course menu featuring my favorite dishes with elegant twists. The wine pairings included a bottle of Chateau Margaux from the year we met, a detail that had taken weeks to source. The guest list required careful consideration. I wanted the people who truly mattered, who'd been part of our journey. Both sets of parents, my college roommates who'd become lifelong friends, Marcus's law school buddies, who'd stood as groomsmen, colleagues who'd become family. I spent hours on the seating chart making sure conversations would flow naturally, that everyone would feel included and comfortable. This night would be perfect, a celebration of everything I'd built, despite the cracks I sensed forming in my foundation. The day before the party, Marcus's behavior became increasingly erratic. He claimed an urgent case required him to work late again the 4th time that week. When he came home past midnight, he went straight to shower without kissing me goodnight, something he'd never done in 8 years together. I lay awake listening to the water run, wondering who he was washing off his skin. The next morning while he slept, I found a receipt from the Mandarin Oriental in his jacket pocket. When confronted, he spun a story about meeting international clients who insisted on lunch at their hotel. His explanation came too quick, too rehearsed, like he'd been preparing for this exact question. That same morning, Sophia called to cancel attending my birthday dinner. She claimed a stomach bug had her bedridden, her voice weak and pitiful. But an hour later, she texted saying she'd found medicine that helped and would definitely make it after all. The inconsistency was so obvious, yet when I mentioned it to Marcus, he accused me of being unfairly suspicious of my sister. He said my jealousy was becoming unattractive, that I needed to work on my insecurities. The gaslighting was so smooth, I almost believed him. The afternoon of my birthday, I treated myself to a spa day, desperate to relax before the evening. While getting a massage, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple but chilling, just 5 words that made my blood run cold. Check his credit card statements. No signature, no explanation. Just those 5 words that confirmed my worst fears weren't paranoid delusions, but warnings I should have heeded. I called my best friend Rachel from the spa parking lot, my hands shaking as I told her about the anonymous message. She listened quietly before speaking the words I needed to hear. Either confront him now or get through tonight and deal with it tomorrow, but don't let this ruin your birthday. She was right, of course. Whatever was happening, I deserved one last beautiful evening before everything exploded. I deserved to blow out my candles without tears that weren't from joy. Arriving back at the office, I found 3 dozen red roses waiting at reception. The card in Marcus's handwriting read, "Happy birthday to my everything now and always." The words that once would have melted my heart now felt like mockery. I stared at those roses, their perfect petals hiding thorns, thinking how appropriate they were. Beautiful on the surface, painful if you held too tight, destined to wilt, no matter how much water you gave them. I arrived at L'Etoile wearing the burgundy dress Marcus had given me last Christmas, the one that made him say I looked like a movie star. The restaurant glowed with warm candlelight, our private dining room already humming with conversation, as early guests mingled over champagne. Marcus stood near the window in his navy suit, the one I'd picked out for him, and his usual confidence seemed forced. He kept checking his phone, running his hand through his hair, a nervous tell I'd learned to recognize over the years. My parents arrived first, my mother fussing over the flower arrangements, while my father slipped the sommelier extra cash to keep the champagne flowing. Rachel came next with her husband Tom, immediately pulling me aside to check if I was okay after our earlier conversation. I assured her I was fine, that tonight was about celebration, not confrontation. Marcus's parents followed his mother, air-kissing my cheeks, while commenting that I looked thin. Was I eating enough? The usual passive-aggressive concern that I'd learned to deflect with practiced grace. As more guests filtered in, I played the perfect hostess, making introductions, sharing anecdotes, laughing at the right moments. My colleagues from the marketing team clustered near the bar, discussing our latest campaign between sips of wine. Marcus's law school friends dominated another corner, their voices growing louder as the drinks flowed freely. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to be there to celebrate with us, completely unaware of the performance they were actually attending. Sophia arrived 30 minutes late, and her entrance stopped conversations mid-sentence. She wore a skin-tight white dress that left nothing to imagination, her hair styled in elaborate waves that must have taken hours. The dress was inappropriate for the occasion, too bridal, too attention-seeking, but that was Sophia's way. She had to be the most beautiful woman in any room, even at her sister's birthday dinner. What struck me most was her glow, a radiance that seemed to emanate from within, making her look almost ethereal in the candlelight. She made her way around the room, hugging guests with unusual enthusiasm, her laugh tinkling like champagne glasses clinking. When she reached Marcus, the hug lasted several beats too long. Her hands lingered on his shoulders, her body pressed against his in a way that made my stomach clench. He stiffened but didn't pull away, his eyes finding mine over her shoulder with an expression I couldn't read. Guilt, fear, warning. When she finally released him, her lipstick had left a faint mark on his collar. We took our seats for dinner, the carefully planned arrangement now feeling like a trap. Sophia sat directly across from Marcus and me, her eyes never leaving his face except to occasionally flash me brilliant smiles that didn't reach her eyes. She kept touching her stomach absently, a gesture so subtle others might not notice, but I saw everything. The way she refused the wine with a delicate shake of her head, the way she pushed the raw oysters away with barely concealed nausea, the way she kept one hand protectively over her middle. The conversation flowed around me while I observed like a detective at a crime scene. Sophia regaled the table with stories from her recent trip to Cabo, describing the pristine beaches and perfect weather. That was last month, when Marcus had supposedly been at a legal conference in Chicago. She mentioned specific dates, February 10th through 15th, the exact days he'd been gone. Either she was deliberately taunting me, or she'd grown careless in her deception. Marcus drank steadily, barely touching his food, his knuckles white around his wine glass. My mother, ever observant, commented on Sophia's appearance multiple times. "You're absolutely glowing, dear," she said. "Have you changed your skincare routine?" Sophia just smiled mysteriously, her hand again finding her stomach. The gesture was becoming more frequent, more obvious, like she was building to something. The other guests remained oblivious, caught up in their own conversations, but I felt the tension building like pressure in a champagne bottle waiting to pop. As the servers cleared the main course, Sophia stood up, tapping her fork against her champagne glass filled with sparkling water. The room quieted, everyone turning to face her with polite attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying perfectly in the intimate space I wanted to take a moment on this special occasion to share some wonderful news. Her eyes found mine, holding my gaze with something that looked almost like sympathy. Or maybe it was triumph. She reached into her purse and pulled out a black and white ultrasound image, holding it up for everyone to see. The room erupted in surprised gasps and excited murmurs. "I'm 3 months pregnant," she announced, her free hand now openly cradling her stomach. The congratulations started immediately, people calling out their joy, raising glasses in toast. But then someone, I think it was Marcus's mother, asked the natural question, "Who's the lucky father?" The room fell silent again, everyone waiting for her answer. Sophia's smile widened her eyes, never leaving my face as she spoke the words that shattered my world into a million pieces. The father is someone very special to all of us, she said slowly, deliberately. Someone who's already part of our family. Her gaze shifted to Marcus, then back to me. Someone my sister loves very much. The silence that followed was deafening. I heard Marcus's wine glass hit the floor, the sound of breaking crystal sharp in the quiet room. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood, but nobody moved to clean it. Every face turned between the three of us, understanding dawning in their expressions like a horrible sunrise. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's face darkened to a shade of purple I'd never seen. Rachel reached for my hand under the table, squeezing so tight it hurt. Marcus started to speak, his voice cracking on my name, but I found myself standing with a calmness I didn't feel. The room spun slightly, but I gripped the edge of the table and remained upright. My voice, when it came, was steady as steel. Well, I said, looking directly at Sophia, that certainly is interesting news. Thank you for sharing it at my birthday dinner. How very thoughtful of you to make this moment about yourself as always. The room remained frozen as I continued standing, my composure holding like armor against the chaos brewing inside me. Sophia's triumphant smile faltered slightly at my calm response, clearly expecting tears or screaming. I picked up my water glass with a steady hand, taking a small sip before setting it down with deliberate precision. Since we're sharing news tonight, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room, I have something to announce as well. My father started to speak, his face still that alarming shade of purple, but I raised my hand gently to stop him. Marcus had found his voice and was stammering something about misunderstandings and explanations, but I didn't even look in his direction. This moment was mine, and I'd been preparing for it without even realizing it. The anonymous text this afternoon hadn't been the first sign. It had simply been the permission I needed to stop pretending everything was fine. 2 months ago I began. I started noticing discrepancies in our joint accounts. Money disappearing, credit card charges that didn't make sense, business trips that seemed suspicious. Like any good businesswoman, I decided to investigate before jumping to conclusions. I hired a private investigator, someone recommended by a colleague who'd been through a similar situation. What they found was quite educational. Marcus's face had gone from red to white, his hands gripping the table edge. Jennifer from his office gasped audibly, probably wondering if she was about to be named. She needn't have worried. I had bigger fish to fry than just naming mistresses. The investigation revealed that my husband has been quite busy. Not just with my sister, though, that relationship goes back at least 6 months based on hotel records and credit card receipts. He's also been involved with Jennifer from his office and our neighbor Amanda from 2 blocks over. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Sophia's face transformed from triumph to devastation, her hand dropping from her stomach as she stared at Marcus in horror. She genuinely hadn't known about the others. In her narcissistic worldview, she'd believed she was special, that Marcus had chosen her over me. The reality that she was just one of many hit her like a physical blow. She sank into her chair, her perfect composure finally cracking. But that's not the most interesting part. I continued, pulling my phone from my purse. The real surprise is what Marcus has been doing professionally. You see, those business trips weren't just covers for affairs. He's been siphoning money from his client trust accounts, using his position to move funds into offshore accounts. The FBI became very interested when I shared my findings with them last week. Marcus shot to his feet, his chair falling backward with a crash. "That's a lie," he shouted, his voice desperate. "You can't prove any of that. This is defamation. I'll sue you for everything." His threat might have been more effective if his hands weren't shaking so badly. I smiled at him, then the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. "Oh, Marcus," I said softly, "you forget that I have access to everything. Your home computer, your backup drives, your cloud storage. You really should have used better passwords than our anniversary date." I held up my phone, showing screenshots of bank transfers, emails, discussing the illegal movements, recorded phone calls, where he brazenly discussed his scheme with an offshore contact. The forensic accountant I hired was very thorough. They found over $2 million missing from various client accounts, all traced to accounts in the Cayman Islands under shell companies Marcus created. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and I'd packaged it all in a neat little file for the authorities. His father, a respected senior partner at another firm, stood up slowly. His face showed not shock, but resignation, like he'd always feared this day would come. "Tell me you didn't do this," he said to his son, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Tell me you didn't destroy everything we built, everything our family name represents." Marcus couldn't meet his father's eyes, his silence more damning than any confession. The room began to shift from shock to anger. Several of Marcus's colleagues were on their phones, likely alerting their firms to the scandal about to break. My mother had moved to comfort Sophia, who was crying silently, mascara streaming down her perfect face. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more bomb to drop, one more truth that needed revealing. "There's something else you should know, Sophia." I said, my voice gentler now, because despite everything, she was still my sister and still a victim. Marcus isn't technically my husband. He's someone else's husband. A woman named Patricia in Sacramento, whom he married 12 years ago and never divorced. Our marriage was never legal. He's been committing bigamy for the past 5 years. The sound Sophia made was inhuman, a wail of pure anguish that cut through the room. She doubled over, clutching her stomach, and for a moment I worried about the baby. Despite my anger, that child was innocent in all of this. My mother and Rachel rushed to her side, while Marcus stood frozen, his elaborate house of cards completely demolished. Everything about him had been a lie, from his marital status, to his professional ethics, to his proclaimed love for any of us. "Patricia knows everything now," I added. "She's flying in tomorrow to deal with the legal implications. Apparently she's been trying to divorce him for years, but couldn't find him after he changed his name slightly and moved across the country. Marcus Edward Williams of Sacramento became Marcus E. Williamson of Boston, just different enough to start fresh to fool everyone, including the Bar Association, that didn't do a thorough enough background check. Security guards appeared at the dining room entrance, not restaurant staff, but FBI agents I'd been told might attend if they finished processing the warrants in time. They approached Marcus with professional calm, one of them quietly stating he was under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and identity fraud. As they cuffed him, he looked at me with eyes that finally showed the real man behind the mask. Not the charming lawyer, not the devoted husband, but a cornered animal who'd been caught in his own trap. "Julia." "Please," he said as they led him past my chair. I looked at him one last time, really looked at the man I'd thought I'd spend my life with. "You did this to yourself," I replied simply. "Every choice, every lie, every betrayal was yours. I just made sure there were consequences." The agents led him out through the main restaurant, past dozens of diners who'd have quite a story to tell about their evening out. The private dining room at L'Etoile looked like a bomb had gone off. Chairs were overturned, napkins thrown down, wine glasses abandoned half full. Most of the guests had fled, mumbling awkward excuses and birthday wishes as they escaped the disaster. Only family and my closest friends remained shell-shocked and trying to process what they'd witnessed. Sophia was still sobbing at the table, her perfect makeup destroyed, her white dress stained with wine from Marcus's spilled glass. My father approached me first, his purple rage replaced with concern. He pulled me into a hug that smelled like his cologne and scotch, the same comforting combination from childhood. "I'm proud of you," he whispered into my hair. "The strength it took, I can't imagine. But sweetheart, are you okay?" I let myself be held for a moment, feeling like a little girl again before straightening my spine. I would be okay, maybe not tonight or tomorrow, but eventually. The restaurant manager appeared diplomatically, suggesting we might want to move to a more private location to sort out the remainder of the evening. He waived the entire bill, saying it was the least they could do given the circumstances. I tried to protest, but he insisted, adding that this would certainly be a story for his memoir someday. His kindness nearly broke my composure, but I held it together, thanking him for his understanding. Sophia had stopped crying, but remained seated, staring at nothing with hollow eyes. I approached her carefully, unsure of my own feelings. The betrayal cut deep, maybe deeper than Marcus's, because she was blood. She was supposed to be my sister first and everything else second. But seeing her devastation, I remembered she was only 29, still young enough to believe she was special, that rules didn't apply to her, that she could take what she wanted without consequences. "He told me you didn't understand him," she said without looking at me. "That your marriage had been dead for years, that you were only together for appearances. He said he was going to leave you after your birthday, that he didn't want to ruin your special day." Her laugh was bitter, broken. "I actually believed that showed he cared about you. Can you believe that I thought it meant he was considerate?" The manipulation was so classic, it would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. Every cheater's handbook must have the same tired lines about misunderstood marriages and waiting for the right time. But there's never a right time for betrayal, never a good moment to destroy someone's world. I wanted to be angry at Sophia's naivety, but I couldn't. We'd both been fooled by the same man, just in different ways. "You need to get tested," I told her quietly. "For everything. If he was with Jennifer and Amanda, and who knows who else, you need to know your status. And the baby needs proper prenatal care regardless of what you decide to do." She nodded numbly, touching her stomach with something like wonder mixed with fear. The pregnancy was real, even if everything else had been fake. My mother orchestrated the exodus, gathering coats and purses, calling cars for those who'd been drinking. She paused beside me, cupping my face in her hands like she used to when I was young. "We'll deal with all of this tomorrow," she said firmly. "Tonight you're coming home with us. No arguments." For once I didn't fight her mothering. The thought of returning to the house I'd shared with Marcus made me physically ill. Rachel and Tom waited with me while the room emptied. Rachel held my hand while Tom dealt with the restaurant staff, making sure everything was handled properly. They'd been through their own crisis years ago when Tom had been laid off and spiraled into depression. They understood that sometimes life exploded, and all you could do was stand in the wreckage and figure out what could be salvaged. Before leaving, I pulled out the divorce papers I'd hidden in my purse, the ones I'd had drawn up the week before, but hadn't been brave enough to use. They were useless now, of course. You can't divorce someone you were never legally married to. But I laid them on the table anyway, a symbol of the ending I'd planned before discovering there had never been a real beginning. Outside the restaurant, Boston's night air was crisp and cold February, trying to pretend spring wasn't coming. I stood on the sidewalk where Marcus had proposed 6 years ago, where I'd said yes to a future that had been built on lies from the start. The irony wasn't lost on me. The beginning and ending in the same place, like a snake eating its own tail. My phone buzzed with messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Word was already spreading through Boston's legal community. Marcus's career was over, that much was certain. Even if he somehow avoided jail time, no firm would touch him after this. The Bar Association would strip his license. His reputation was destroyed, his carefully constructed life in ruins. Good, I thought viciously. Let him burn. Tom brought the car around and I climbed into the back seat with Rachel. As we drove through the city, I watched the familiar streets pass by, feeling disconnected from my own life. Tomorrow, I'd have to deal with everything. The house, the bank accounts, the social media announcement, the questions from colleagues and acquaintances. Tonight, though, I could just exist in this strange space between my old life and whatever came next. "We're going to get through this," Rachel said, squeezing my hand. "You're the strongest person I know, Julia. This doesn't break you. It reveals you. And what I see is a woman who stood up for herself, who refused to be a victim, who turned the worst night of her life into something powerful. She was being kind, but her words planted a seed of something that might someday grow into pride." When we reached my parents' house in Brookline, my childhood bedroom was already made up with fresh sheets and my mother's best guest towels. She'd even put a vase of tulips on the nightstand, my favorite flowers since I was 7 years old. These small acts of love, of care, reminded me that not everything in my life had been false. Some things were real, solid, trustworthy. I sat on the twin bed where I'd once dreamed about my wedding day, about the perfect husband and perfect life I'd have. That girl couldn't have imagined this outcome, wouldn't have believed how wrong everything could go. But she also couldn't have imagined the strength it would take to stand up in that restaurant and refuse to be diminished. Maybe losing my illusions was the price of finding my power. The next morning arrived with surprising gentleness. Sun streamed through the lace curtains my mother had hung when I was in high school, creating patterns on the hardwood floor. For a moment, waking up in my childhood bed, I could pretend nothing had changed. Then reality crashed back, and I reached for my phone to find 47 missed calls and over 100 text messages. The legal community in Boston was small, and scandal traveled at the speed of light. My boss had left a voicemail expressing support and telling me to take all the time I needed. 3 major news outlets had requested comments. Patricia Marcus's actual wife had left a message saying she'd arrived at Logan Airport and would like to meet if I was willing. The FBI wanted to schedule a formal interview. My life had become a 3-ring circus overnight, and I was the reluctant ringmaster. I made coffee in my parents' kitchen, the familiar ritual grounding me. My father was already at the table reading news on his tablet, his expression grim. "It's in the Globe," he said without preamble. Not the details about Sophia, thankfully, but the arrest and the fraud charges. They're calling it one of the biggest embezzlement cases in Boston law firm history. 2.3 million confirmed missing so far, possibly more. The numbers were staggering. How had Marcus thought he'd get away with it, but then again, he'd gotten away with bigamy for 5 years with multiple affairs for who knows how long. His confidence had been his downfall. The belief that he was smarter than everyone else, that rules didn't apply to him. Pride goeth before a fall, and his had been spectacular. Sophia arrived around noon looking haggard but determined. She'd spent the morning at the doctor confirming the pregnancy was healthy and getting tested for STDs. All clear so far, though some tests would need to be repeated in a few months. She sat at the kitchen table accepting the tea my mother offered, looking younger than her 29 years. "I've been thinking all night," she began, her voice hoarse from crying. "About everything. About how I got here, how I became someone who would do this to her own sister." She paused, gathering courage. "I've always been jealous of you, Julia. Not of your things or your success, but of how you always seemed to know who you were. I've been playing a character my whole life, the pretty one, the fun one, the one who could get away with anything, but I never figured out who I actually was underneath. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had." Sophia talked about feeling empty despite all the attention about using her beauty as currency, because she didn't believe she had anything else to offer. She'd seen Marcus as validation that she could compete with me, could win something that mattered. The baby hadn't been planned, but when she found out, she'd thought it meant Marcus would choose her, that she'd finally have something permanent. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, tears starting again. "I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm going to change. I'm keeping the baby, and I'm going to raise it right, teach it values I never learned. I'm done with modeling, done with the party lifestyle. I'm going back to school to finish my degree. Maybe become a counselor someday, help other women who've lost themselves like I did." The journey toward forgiving Sophia would be long and complicated. Trust once shattered couldn't be glued back together overnight. But sitting there in our mother's kitchen, seeing her genuinely broken and trying to rebuild, I felt the first stirring of possibility. We might never be close, but perhaps we could find a new kind of relationship built on truth instead of pretense. Patricia arrived that afternoon, and she wasn't what I expected. Instead of bitter or angry, she seemed relieved, almost grateful. She was 45, a successful real estate agent in Sacramento with 2 teenage kids who thought their father had died in a car accident when they were young. Marcus had abandoned them 12 years ago, disappeared with their savings, and left her drowning in debt. "I hired 3 different private investigators over the years," she explained over coffee in my parents' living room. "But he'd changed his name just enough, moved far enough, created a new identity that was perfectly legal except for the marriage part." When the FBI called me yesterday, I actually laughed. Finally, after all these years, consequences. She shared stories about the Marcus she'd known, and the patterns were identical. The charm, the lies, the other women, the missing money. He'd been running the same con for over a decade, just getting better at it each time. Patricia had brought documents that would help the FBI's case, including proof of his identity fraud and evidence of earlier embezzlement from his first law firm. "The irony is, I actually owe you a thank you," she said. "You did what I never could. You exposed him completely publicly in a way he can't escape from this time. My kids can finally get closure about their father, know that he was the problem, not them. And maybe I can finally get the divorce that should have happened 12 years ago." We spent the afternoon comparing notes, finding strange comfort in our shared experience. Patricia showed me photos of her children, talked about the life she'd built from the ashes Marcus had left behind. She'd gone back to school, started her own business, raised 2 amazing kids alone. She was proof that there was life after Marcus, good life, successful life, happy life. By the end of the week, Marcus's crimes had expanded beyond what any of us imagined. The FBI discovered he'd been running similar schemes in 3 different states, using variations of his name, targeting wealthy women while embezzling from their businesses or his employers. The total amount stolen exceeded $5 million. He faced federal charges that carried a minimum of 20 years in prison, possibly more. His law firm held an emergency meeting where they discovered the extent of his deception. Several major clients threatened to sue. His father publicly disowned him, releasing a statement distancing the family from his crimes. Jennifer from his office came forward admitting their affair, but swearing she knew nothing about the fraud. Amanda. Our neighbor had already put her house on the market, unable to face the shame of being the other woman. I returned to our Beacon Hill house with Rachel and a moving crew, packing my belongings with surgical precision. Every item fell into categories of before and after, keep and burn. The wedding photos went into the trash. The furniture we'd chosen together would be sold. I kept only what was mine before Marcus, what was wholly untainted by his presence. In his home office, I found more evidence of his double life. Credit cards I didn't know existed, photos with women I'd never seen, business cards with names that weren't quite his. It was like excavating a crime scene, each layer revealing new deceptions. How exhausting it must have been to maintain so many lies, to remember which story belonged to which person, to never be able to just exist as himself. The next 6 months passed in a blur of legal procedures and personal rebuilding. The house sold quickly, the proceeds going entirely to me since Marcus had used stolen funds for his portion of the down payment. I found a beautiful 2-bedroom condo overlooking the Charles River, a space that was entirely mine, with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded every room with light. No more dark corners where secrets could hide. My company rallied around me with unexpected warmth. Instead of treating me like a scandal, they saw me as a survivor. My story became a cautionary tale at women's networking events, but also an inspiration. I spoke at conferences about recognizing red flags, about trusting intuition, about the importance of financial independence. My professional reputation, rather than suffering, actually grew stronger. The trial began in August, and I attended every day, taking notes in a leather journal. Marcus looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, his designer suits and confident swagger replaced by slumped shoulders and hollow eyes. He tried to catch my eye several times, but I looked through him like he was glass. He'd become nothing more than evidence in my story of survival. His defense attorney tried to paint him as a man overwhelmed by pressure, making poor choices, but not malicious ones. The prosecution destroyed that narrative with precision, presenting evidence of calculated deception spanning years. Patricia testified about the family he'd abandoned. 3 other women came forward with similar stories from different cities. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The day he was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not joy or satisfaction, but a loosening of chains I hadn't realized were still binding me. Sophia was there too, 7 months pregnant, and wearing a simple maternity dress instead of her usual attention-seeking outfits. We didn't sit together, but we nodded in acknowledgement. Progress came in small gestures. I started therapy with a specialist in betrayal trauma unpacking, not just Marcus's deception, but the family dynamics that had made me susceptible to it. Why had I ignored the red flags? Why had I prioritized keeping peace over protecting myself? The answers were complicated, rooted in childhood patterns of being the responsible one, the fixer, the one who made everything okay for everyone else. My therapist introduced me to the concept of post-traumatic growth, the idea that trauma could be a catalyst for positive change rather than just damage. I threw myself into this idea, taking up kickboxing to feel powerful in my body again, joining a book club to expand my mind beyond work, volunteering at a women's shelter to help others escaping deceptive relationships. Sophia gave birth to a daughter in October, naming her Grace. When she called asking if I wanted to meet my niece, I hesitated only briefly before saying yes. The baby was beautiful with Sophia's delicate features, but darker hair probably from Marcus. Holding Grace, I felt the last of my anger toward my sister dissolve. This innocent child didn't deserve to carry the weight of her parents' sins. We developed a tentative routine where I'd visit Grace once a week. Sophia was true to her word about changing working part-time while taking online classes in psychology. She lived in a modest apartment now, having sold her luxury items to pay for baby supplies and tuition. The glamorous influencer was gone, replaced by a young mother determined to break cycles. During one visit, Sophia asked if I could ever truly forgive her. I thought carefully before answering. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip, I told her. It's a choice you make daily, sometimes hourly. Some days I make that choice easily, other days it's harder. But I'm trying for Grace, for our family, and honestly for myself. Holding on to anger is exhausting, and I've been tired for too long. My career flourished in unexpected ways. The company promoted me to vice president of marketing, recognizing that my ability to handle personal crisis with grace translated into professional strength. I led our most successful campaign to date, a women's empowerment initiative that felt personally meaningful. My story, without the specific details, became part of my professional narrative of resilience. I started dating again 11 months after the birthday disaster, mostly at Rachel's insistence. Daniel was a software engineer I met at a conference, kind and steady with a gentle sense of humor. He knew my story, everyone in Boston seemed to, but he didn't treat me like damaged goods or a cautionary tale. Our first dates were refreshingly normal, talking about books and hiking trails, no drama or deception. On what would have been my 6th wedding anniversary with Marcus, I received a letter from him in prison. I debated whether to open it, finally deciding I deserved to know what he had to say. His handwriting was still perfect, controlled even in his diminished circumstances. He wrote about understanding the damage he'd caused, about getting therapy in prison, about hoping someday I could forgive him. I burned the letter in my kitchen sink, watching his words turn to ash and wash away. Forgiveness wasn't mine to give him. He needed to seek that from a higher power or from himself. My forgiveness was reserved for people who deserved space in my life, and Marcus had forfeited that right permanently. The smoke detector went off, and I laughed at the absurdity, waving a dish towel to clear the air. Daniel and I grew closer, gradually building something real on a foundation of honesty. He met Grace and charmed Sophia with his genuineness. My parents adored him, especially when he fixed their computer without being asked. There was no whirlwind romance, no grand gestures, just steady, consistent presence. After Marcus's elaborate performances, Daniel's authenticity felt revolutionary. One evening as we cooked dinner together in my condo, Daniel asked about my trust issues. Didn't being betrayed so thoroughly make it hard to believe in anyone I considered while chopping vegetables, the routine domestic task grounding my thoughts? It did the opposite, actually, I realized. Marcus taught me what deception looks like, sounds like, feels like. Now I can recognize truth more clearly. You can't fake genuine consistently. Truth has a different weight to it. 2 years after that explosive birthday dinner, I stood in front of another gathering, this time as the keynote speaker at a women's leadership conference. The auditorium held 500 people, all waiting to hear my story of survival and success. The woman introducing me listed my professional accomplishments, but also mentioned my personal journey from betrayal to triumph. The applause was warm, welcoming, accepting. I began my speech with the same words I'd once heard Sophia say. My name is Julia, and at 34, I thought I had the perfect life. The audience leaned forward, recognizing the beginning of a story they wanted to hear. But I told them perfection was an illusion, that the cracks in my facade had been there all along, hidden by my desperate desire to maintain an image that was slowly killing me. I talked about the danger of ignoring intuition, of explaining away red flags, of prioritizing peace over truth. The anonymous text that warned me to check credit card statements hadn't been the first sign. There had been dozens of moments when my body told me something was wrong, when my instincts screamed warnings I chose to silence. The lesson wasn't just about catching liars, but about trusting ourselves. The speech wove together personal anecdotes with practical advice. How to maintain financial independence in marriage. Why background checks weren't paranoid but practical. The importance of having your own support network separate from your partner. I watched heads nod in recognition, saw some women taking notes with urgent intensity. These were lessons learned in blood and tears, too valuable not to share. During the question period, a young woman asked how I'd found the strength to expose everything so publicly instead of handling it privately. I thought of that moment in the restaurant, standing before family and friends, choosing radical honesty over comfortable deception. Silence protects predators, I told her. Marcus counted on my desire to avoid scandal to protect our image. But image isn't worth protecting if it's built on lies. After the conference, I met with several women privately who shared their own stories of deception and betrayal. Some were just beginning to see the truth, others were years into recovery. We formed an informal support group that met monthly, sharing resources and strategies, celebrating victories and mourning losses. The sisterhood born from shared trauma was unexpected but healing. Sophia attended one of my speeches, sitting in the back row with Grace sleeping in a carrier. She'd graduated with her psychology degree and was working at a crisis center while pursuing her master's. The party girl was completely gone, replaced by a thoughtful woman who used her own mistakes to help others. After the speech, she waited until the crowd dispersed before approaching. I'm proud of you, she said simply. Not just for surviving, but for turning this into something meaningful. You could have retreated, hidden, let it break you. Instead, you're out here helping other women avoid our mistakes. That takes a courage I'm only beginning to understand. Her words meant more than any standing ovation, representing a bridge rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. Daniel proposed on my 37th birthday, 3 years after the disaster. He chose a quiet morning at home rather than a public spectacle, making breakfast and hiding the ring in a jewelry box next to my coffee cup. The proposal was a question, not a performance, and I said yes, with complete certainty. This time I knew exactly who I was marrying and why. We had a small wedding the following spring, just immediate family and closest friends in my parents' backyard. Sophia was my maid of honor, a choice that surprised everyone, but felt right. She'd earned that place through years of genuine change and rebuilding. Grace was our flower girl, toddling down the aisle, throwing petals with chaotic enthusiasm that made everyone laugh. Patricia sent a wedding gift with a note that read, "To new beginnings built on truth." She'd remarried this previous year to a man who knew her entire history and loved her anyway. We'd stayed in touch, bound by our strange shared experience, checking in periodically to celebrate milestones. Her children were thriving in college, having processed their father's abandonment with therapy and time. The FBI occasionally contacted me with updates about Marcus's case. He'd been transferred to different facilities twice due to behavioral issues. His charm didn't work as well in federal prison as it had in Boston society. He'd attempted to run schemes even behind bars, trying to manipulate other inmates and guards. Some patterns apparently were too ingrained to break. My work in women's advocacy expanded beyond speaking engagements. I joined the board of a nonprofit supporting financial literacy for women, helping develop programs that taught the warning signs of financial abuse. We created workshops for young women entering relationships, teaching them to protect their assets and maintain independence. The program expanded to 12 cities within 2 years. Daniel and I bought a house in Cambridge, a Victorian that needed work, but had beautiful bones. We spent weekends stripping wallpaper and refinishing floors, building something together from scratch. There was metaphorical weight to the renovation, taking something damaged and making it beautiful again through patient work and attention. The house became a symbol of second chances. Grace started calling me Aunt Julie, her toddler pronunciation making it sound like Aunt Judy, which became a family joke. Watching her grow without the shadow of her father's crimes was a gift. Sophia had told her an age-appropriate version of truth that her father had made bad choices and couldn't be with them. Someday she'd need more details, but for now she was just a happy child surrounded by love. During a particularly difficult therapy session, my therapist asked if I regretted marrying Marcus given how it ended. I thought about the question for a long time before answering. I regret that he wasn't who he pretended to be, I finally said. But I don't regret the journey that led me here. Without that experience, I'd still be the woman who ignored her intuition, who prioritized appearance over authenticity. That birthday dinner didn't break me, it broke the false version of me that needed to die. The birthday that changed everything became a personal holiday of sorts. Each year on that date, I did something to celebrate my freedom and growth. Sometimes it was a solo trip to somewhere I'd always wanted to go. Other years it was a gathering of the women from my support group, toasting our survival with champagne and stories of progress. The date that could have been traumatic became empowering. 5 years after the incident, I received notice that Marcus was being considered for early release due to prison overcrowding and good behavior. The prosecutor contacted me about writing a victim impact statement. I spent weeks crafting it not from anger but from a desire to document the full extent of damage one person's deception could cause. The parole was denied, and he remained incarcerated. My story became a case study in law schools, examining the intersection of family law, criminal fraud, and bigamy. Professors invited me to speak to their classes about the personal side of white-collar crime. Students always asked the same question: how did you not know? I explained that skilled manipulators created alternate realities so convincing that questioning them felt like questioning gravity itself. Sometimes the greatest gift comes wrapped in the ugliest paper. My 34th birthday gave me the gift of freedom, truth, and ultimately myself back. The woman who stood in that restaurant exposing lies was always inside me, waiting for permission to exist. Marcus's betrayal didn't create her, it revealed her. And she turned out to be exactly who I needed to become. Looking back now, I can see that birthday dinner as a twisted blessing. Without it, I might have spent decades in a false marriage, never knowing real love, never discovering my own strength. Sophia might have continued her destructive patterns, teaching them to Grace. Patricia might never have gotten closure. Sometimes destruction is necessary for reconstruction, and that night everything false in my life was demolished to make room for truth. The scars remain, of course. Trust comes harder now, skepticism lives closer to the surface. But these aren't weaknesses, they're tools for navigating a world where deception exists. I've learned to read micro-expressions, to verify stories, to maintain independence within interdependence. These skills born from trauma became superpowers in both personal and professional life. My marriage to Daniel is nothing like what I had with Marcus. It's quieter, steadier, built on daily choices rather than grand gestures. We have separate bank accounts and a joint one for shared expenses. We have difficult conversations instead of avoiding conflict. We fact-check each other's memories of events, laughing about our different perspectives, rather than insisting on one truth. It's partnership based on reality, not performance. Grace is 5 now, starting kindergarten with her mother's beauty, and what we hope is her aunt's wisdom. She knows Aunt Julie and Uncle Daniel as stable figures in her life, showing her what healthy relationships look like. Sophia has begun dating a single father from her graduate program, taking it slow, applying everything she's learned about herself and red flags. She asks my opinion, not for permission, but for perspective. The women from my support group have become lifelong friends. We've celebrated divorces, finalized careers, rebuilt healthy relationships, begun children protected from toxic patterns. What started as a gathering of victims became a powerful network of survivors. We joke that we should thank our deceivers for bringing us together, though none of us actually would. My parents, now in their 70s, often reflect on that night. My mother admits she saw signs she ignored, choosing to believe the performance because it was easier than confronting uncomfortable truths. My father says watching me stand up that night was both the worst and best moment of his parenting life. Worst because his daughter was in pain, best because she refused to accept it quietly. I still receive messages from women who've heard my story asking for advice about their own situations. I always tell them the same thing: trust your instincts, verify everything, and remember that love shouldn't require you to ignore reality. Real love can withstand investigation questions and boundaries. Anyone who makes you feel crazy for seeking truth is showing you exactly who they are. The French restaurant where everything happened has become oddly special to me. I go there every year on my birthday, sitting in the same private dining room, toasting my continued freedom and growth. The staff knows my story and always comps my champagne. It's become a pilgrimage of sorts, returning to the scene not of a crime, but of a rebirth. This year I'm 39, 5 years past that explosive evening. Daniel will be with me, along with Sophia, Grace, Rachel, and my parents. We'll toast to truth, to growth, to the strange ways life teaches us who we really are. Marcus remains in prison where he belongs, a footnote in my story, rather than a main character. The woman he married doesn't exist anymore. In her place stands someone far more interesting, a survivor who refused to be silenced. What would you do if you discovered your entire life was built on lies? How would you respond if betrayal came from multiple directions at once? These are questions I hope you never have to answer. But if you do find yourself standing in your own metaphorical restaurant, surrounded by deception and demanding truth, remember this: you're stronger than you know. The hardest moment of your life might also be the beginning of your real one. To anyone watching who's living with suspicion, who's explaining away red flags, who's prioritizing keeping peace over finding truth, let me say this: you deserve honesty. You deserve a life built on solid ground rather than shifting sand. The temporary disaster of revelation is nothing compared to the slow death of living a lie. Trust yourself, investigate your doubts, and never apologize for demanding truth in your own life. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories of women who refused to accept the unacceptable, who turned their worst moments into their strongest foundations. Comment below with your own experiences of discovering strength you didn't know you had. Remember, sometimes the birthday gift you need most is the explosion that sets you free. Until next time, stay strong, stay skeptical, and most importantly, stay true to yourself.